Hello, fellow fight fans, and welcome to the Untitled Fightcast number 007. Plenty of stuff is going on in the UFC, especially in the light heavyweight division, with Jan Blachowicz' win over Corey Anderson, possibly setting him up for a fight with Jon Jones. Now, whether or not that's going to happen, we'll see. I just watched a video by Chael Sonnen saying that maybe him and Dominic Reyes should have a fight to see which one of them should fight Jon Jones, and I think that's really the best, but I'm not sure if Jan's going to take that. He really, truly, 100,000,000% believes that he has earned that fight with Jon, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong. The only reason this is even up for debate is only because Dominic Reyes did such a good job in his fight against Jon Jones. So who knows? But today I want to do something a bit more fun. So this week we're going to talk about, very recently I saw a trailer for a movie called Spencer Confidential, where Donald freaking Cerrone was playing a guy in prison next to Mark Wahlberg and Post Malone. But apparently Don has appeared in a couple different things before that, including Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh, cowboy! Hey, oh!
So A, we live in a very strange world, and B, I was tempted to look up what MMA fighters have been in movies and television. And apparently, it's quite a few. Retrospect is 2020, but now as I sit here thinking about it, lots of fighters actually have pretty decent personalities, so it's not the craziest thing in the world that they got into acting, especially with them knowing that they can't fight forever. No athlete can be an athlete forever. So, let's wrap up, lock in, and get this started. So I actually wanted to start off with the very first MMA fighter to be in a movie, and that is Oleg Taktarov. The UFC started in 1993. Oleg made his debut in the Octagon in 1995, and the next year he appeared in a movie called Total Force, where, of course, he played a big Russian guy. And Oleg has basically, well, at least in the beginning of his career, always played the quintessential Russian guy. He's got the action jaw, he's built and white as hell, and he's obviously from Russia, so he was always the perfect candidate as an antagonist. Now, Oleg's been in a bunch of movies, but sticking with some of the first fighters in the sport and in movies, I want to move on to Randy Couture, who I saw in Expendables and didn't even know he was a real fighter when I watched that at the time. Oleg didn't necessarily have to do the hardest bit of acting. Again, he just had to play that hard, physically imposing Russian guy, whereas Randy can actually act pretty damn well. His first acting role wasn't exactly anything to write home about, appearing as fighter number 8 in Cradle to the Grave, where actually quite a number of UFC fighters appeared. That movie was where Jet Li teamed up with rapper DMX and fought a bunch of people, but especially literally had a cage fight scene with a bunch of UFC fighters. So yeah, that's a real thing that happened. This is the wonderful world that we live in. Those who appeared alongside Randy were Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, so this movie really swung for the fences in terms of getting some very big names in there. And both Chuck and Tito had their own acting careers before this, and both went on to have extended acting careers after that. One of those two we will be talking about later. Randy then appeared in over 20 other projects, including both film and TV, even appearing in Hawaii Five-0 on 4 separate occasions. But next up in our lineup, we've got someone who's not just known for his fighting, and for some people even more so, but he's also known for his personality, which has obviously translated very well over to acting. That is Michael the Count Bisping. He's another one that I saw on screen before I even knew he was a fighter, and he actually appeared in one of my favorite shows, which is Dark Matter. He often seems to play someone that already sort of has bits and pieces of his real life personality mixed in, which means I guess he's kind of only half acting, and that's what makes him a good actor. But with that bombastic personality, he also makes a great analyst and commentator for the UFC, if you haven't seen that. Especially his recent post-fight commentary alongside Michael Chiesa. I mean, that was actually just very entertaining. If you haven't seen it, go on YouTube, watch it. It's great. So moving on from the guys, next up is the woman who put women's MMA on the map. The lovely, beautiful, genuine, badass, and talented as hell Gina Carano. This feels like the story of this episode, but surprise, surprise, I saw her in a film before I actually even knew she was a fighter. That was in Deadpool, which, by the way, is one of my favorite movies, and she does a very good job. For Deadpool, she was actually asked to have her boob out on the screen, and funny enough, after the producers or the director or whoever asked her to do this, I think about 3 or 4 different times, they finally gave in to her and said, fine, we'll cover it up on the screen. So her boob was technically out, but they kind of covered it up a little bit, and it led to this wonderfully funny moment in a movie that is basically about action and comedy mixed together.
Oh, you're on the left. You're beautiful.
That is so sweet. Thanks.
And it's just kind of funny to think that that moment wouldn't have been in there if Gina hadn't stood up for herself and taken the role on her terms. She's now in The Mandalorian, which, while I haven't watched it, I know is Disney Plus's flagship title. So Gina, if you're watching this, congratulations, because that is awesome. Appropriately enough, her first debut on the screen outside of fighting was in a show called Fight Girls, which was a reality TV show about women fighting. It was about women learning Muay Thai, which also happens to be one of my favorite martial arts. And she even went on to be in a video game, Command & Conquer 3, as a Russian chick, which is awesome. Hashtag nerd alert. Her big break, though, was in Fast and the Furious 6, and she's been slowly on the up and up since, obviously culminating in that Mandalorian role, and couldn't be more excited for her. And staying with women fighters, we move on to the woman that basically picked up and carried the torch from Gina.
I don't think I would be here because the first women's MMA fight I saw was her and Julie Kedzie.
Right.
So I would not have even known it was an option for me. She's the one that planted the seed in my mind. And yeah, she's changed my entire life. And thank God for that girl.
And brought women's MMA to the UFC. That is the one and only Ronda Rousey. Many people say that her involvement in Hollywood is what led to her decline in fighting, but whether or not this is true, you can't say that she doesn't work hard or is talented. Because of her fame in the UFC, she immediately got a role in a big movie, something you might have heard of, The Expendables 3, which got mixed reviews, but that's not the point. It was a AAA movie. She then went on to be in the 7th Fast and the Furious movie, which apparently is just called Furious 7. I guess they weren't that fast? I don't know. But since then, she's gone on to do a lot of work in the WWE, which actually is very exciting from my point of view because she gets to mix not just her acting skills that she's been able to work on over the past couple years, but she gets to mix that with her athleticism. Because yes, ladies and gentlemen, of course, wrestling isn't real, but she gets to still be this big personality where she's tough and badass, and she gets to do all this crazy wrestling stuff, which, while yes, is acting, is physical acting, it takes athleticism. The men and women in the WWE are absolutely athletes, except maybe a couple of people here and there, but more often than not, 99% of the time, they're in there putting in some physical work. And Ronda's even been able to mix in some of her, real life, like judo and stuff, into the WWE, which as an MMA fan, I think that's awesome that they bring that into the sport of professional wrestling entertainment. More recently, outside of the WWE, she's been in the new Charlie's Angels and a TV show called 911, which I actually haven't heard of, but hey, good shit. Her favorite thing of mine, though, that she's done recently is actually voicing Sonya Blade in Mortal Kombat 11, where she's a badass.
You've been looking for me, Scarlett. Hi.
And does a pretty damn good job, if you ask me. I've heard some people criticizing her voice acting, but I didn't have a problem with it at all. Mortal Kombat isn't as cheesy as it used to be. It's taken a bit more of a serious tone, but it's still over the top and bombastic, and I think she fit the role really well, especially now that Sonya Blade and really all of the women in Mortal Kombat are less just big-boobed women basically wearing no clothes. I mean, Sonya Blade is, completely covered covered up in a police officer, SWAT, military uniform, whatever. It's awesome. Good for Ronda because her fighting career didn't end the way she wanted it to, but she's still a legend in the sport again. She's the one that brought women's MMA to the UFC. So Ronda Rousey, happy for you. I know she's getting married. Hope all that goes well. She'll probably never see this, but if she does, there you go. Congrats. I'm a fan for sure. And before we wrap up here, I'd very much like to get some honorable mentions in. First off is George St. Pierre, otherwise known as GSP. He's got a really short resume in terms of the acting department, but his biggest role was in a fight against Captain freaking America. So if you ask me, GSP isn't doing too bad outside of the fight game. And lastly, real quick, we already talked about Chuck, and I'm not going to go over what is actually a fairly extensive acting career, but I want to mention his very first gig in acting, and that's actually as a child actor playing a Boy Scout. So I'm going to leave y'all with that one real quick. And so that's a rundown of just a few of the surprisingly many fighters that have appeared in film and television. If there's anyone you'd like me to talk about in the future, because I'm sure I'll do a part 2 to this, because again, that list is rather long, lay it down in the comments below. Hit that ding dong if you want to stay updated on these videos. And as always, thank you all so much for the support, and I'll see you in next week's video.